So we've talked about why this forearm cut exists on Marvel Legends, and why a ball and socket waist isn't used more often. And now we're going to talk about 3 cuts that probably shouldn't exist. I'm Glen, and this is Super Articulated. I spent most of yesterday seeing the new Spider-Man film and also playing Halo, and not preparing for this video, so I apologize if this is a mess. But speaking of movies, television, anything, when it comes to editing, the number one rule that I like to follow, that I have to follow for my job, is to make my edits, my cuts, as natural feeling as possible. Invisible editing. And then I come home and play with these stupid action figures, and I noticed that there's some overlap in that philosophy. Action figures are made of a bunch of different parts, and that means there has to be separations in the sculpt, cuts that have to feel natural. On Hasbro Super Articulated Marvel Legends female figures specifically, there is a cut, a separation between the torso and the neck of the figures. This is a bad cut, but I'll explain why. So rule number 1, this cut has to feel natural. Well, this cut completely bisects the sculpt, ignoring musculature, ignoring any sort of design, but it has to serve a purpose, right? So I want to get into a couple of other rules that I have for what makes a good cut. On top of feeling natural, a cut should probably also contribute to range of motion, articulation. We can see there is a separation between the forearm and the hand of this figure. It's a hinge and peg that allows the hand to rotate and hinge up and down. Those points of articulation, that range of motion would not be there if there was not a separation in the sculpt. And if we go back to this neck separation, it's not a point of articulation. It does nothing to benefit the range of motion of the figure. So let's continue. Separations in the sculpt should probably reinforce the design of the figure. If we go back to this wrist cut, we can see that this separation implies the end of her cuff of her shirt, allowing these 2 pieces of plastic to be cast in separate colors. Well, we go back to that neck cut, and we can see for this Lady Deadpool figure specifically, they've decoed the collar around her neck, and they've aligned it somewhat with that separation in the sculpt. But if we turn the figure around, we can see the separation between the collar and the sculpt. And in fact, when looking at this figure from the back, assuming you don't have a head on there, it draws attention to itself. So this cut, once again, fails to reinforce the design of the costume. Now, to be fair and balanced, on other figures like the 85th anniversary Ms. Marvel, this cut allowed the lower torso and the neck to be cast in 2 separate pieces, the black of her chest and the flesh tone of her neck, instead of having the neck decoed into the correct color, or having no separation between the flesh and the costume at all. But on other figures, like the Target exclusive X Factor Jean Grey, there is no separation in color. There is no black band to hide that cut, and so it feels very prominent, even in promotional pictures. And the third rule that makes a great cut is playability. Well, let's go back to that wrist cut again for an example. This cut accommodates interchangeable parts, a key gimmick of these Marvel Legends figures for the past 12 years. And again, going back to this cut at the neck, there's no interchangeability. I don't want to take this apart because I don't want to ruin this figure, but my theory is that this separation allows the neck to be clamped over this barbell joint, ensuring that it stays in place, especially when you're swapping out different heads. And that might be great from an engineering perspective, but from a consumer, from a collector perspective, this cut fails to be natural. It fails to increase range of motion. It fails to align with the design of the figure, and it fails to increase playability. This does nothing. What they could have done, and I really do not understand why they didn't do this, is that they could have extended the internal ball joint that connects the mid and upper torso together into the neck itself, and scooped out enough of the upper torso to create a separate neck piece. G.I. Joe has been doing this for a while. It's partially hidden, but there is a separation at the neck, giving her full range of motion at both the base of the neck and head. They would have had to play with tolerances to ensure that the neck stayed in place while you could still swap out the heads, but they are a multi-million, multi-billion dollar company. They could have figured that out. And now we are instantly stuck with a mold that is outdated because of that neck joint. This cut should not exist. So the second cut that I feel like probably shouldn't exist, we'll use Vulcan here as an example. And I know some of you aren't going to agree with this, but the thigh cut, for very similar reasons to that neck joint. Again, this cut completely ignores musculature, bisecting the sculpt in two without any consideration for how those muscles connect to the leg. It fails to look natural, but it does contribute to articulation. It allows the leg to rotate above the knee 360 degrees. Now that's not exactly realistic. You can't rotate your thigh at the hip full 360 degrees, but it's a decent approximation. However, there have been other solutions. Let's use this Marvel Select Captain America for an example. He does not feature a cut at the thigh. Instead, there is an internal joint that allows the leg to rotate. Not very much, but a decent amount. And we can see the same deal on Mattel's Masters of the Universe Chronicles. If we upskirt He-Man real quick and maybe drop down that leg, we can see that there is no thigh cut. There's really only a tiny bit of rotation that is possible. And so does this cut contribute to the design at all? In this case, no. But I can think of the new Jada Toys Adam Eve figure that they announced at San Diego Comic-Con. They use thigh cuts, and that cut separates her costume and the flesh of her leg in a natural way. But then again, you look at figures like Lady Deadpool and how they sometimes have designs that run along the length of the leg and how it can just be broken in two instantly. So there's give and take. But what about playability? Well, there's nothing really that can be done with this. You can separate the upper and lower leg, and sometimes that allows you to change out belts and stuff like that, like I did on this Lady Deadpool figure. But that's not really an intended gimmick. What could Hasbro and many other companies do differently? Well, they could go the Mafex, the McFarlane, the Marvel Select route and just have an internal joint within that thigh that still ensures a little bit of rotation, an effective amount of rotation that might be more realistic. The best solution that I have seen, at least, actually comes from Unparalleled Universe's Odious figure. This is not sponsored, by the way. So watch the rotation on this leg. Decent amount of inner rotation, but check out that outer rotation. We're still going. Holy shit. And that's not even a very complicated design. The T-joint that connects the crotch to the actual legs themselves have these giant ball and sockets that are cut out enough to be able to get that kind of range of motion. Now, there is some gappage. You are able to see it, but this is such a simple design that works so effectively and that is less complex than this cut at the leg. So how many pieces is that actually? There's the crossbar joint that connects to the upper thigh, that connects to the lower thigh. That's 3 pieces. And if we look at Odious, crossbar, leg, that's it. 2 pieces. Switching to this method would save on parts, save on cost, save on labor probably, would never allow deco to be misaligned, and not bisect the muscles of the sculpt in 2 separate pieces. Depending on the tolerance, might allow legs to be interchanged, possibly. So the third cut, and I'll use Vulcan here to demonstrate again, the boot cut. Same principles apply once again. It's a horizontal cut that bisects the sculpt in 2, ignoring any sort of musculature. However, unlike the previous 2 cuts, it does contribute to both range of motion, and it does contribute to the design of the figure separating the boot and the upper part of the leg so that they can be cast in two separate pieces. And if you heat it up enough, you can separate the boot from the mushroom peg, which gives the figure potential to swap parts. In fact, that is the whole reason why boot cuts and forearm cuts exist, to be able to swap sculpts. So it hits 3 out of the 4 rules. Why don't I like it? Well, let's say a character doesn't have this exact boot design and has maybe like an irregular cuff. I'm thinking specifically of that redo Bucky Cap figure that used this Vulcan mold. The cuffs were just a little too long between the mid-calf and ankles. They would have been silly if they had not elongated the leg, making that new Bucky Cap feel more like a McFarlane figure.
Hello?
Or if we go a little bit older, and we'll use Ant-Man as an example, normally he has the same zigzaggy design on his forearm on his boot. But because this boot cut is simply horizontal, it would have cut that design completely in half. Now, what I'm not saying is that we should remove the cut between the leg and foot, like many female Hasbro Marvel Legends figures. This is not a good design. The ankle pivot is not a perfect representation of the human foot. You need some kind of rotation below the knee to be able to hit certain poses. So my proposal is what many companies do with many of their figures. Take that boot cut and lower it to the ankle. They've done it before with figures like the new Luke Cage and the Doctor Doom buck that they use all the time. Like on this Mattel He-Man, you can see that a ball joint has been introduced between the leg and the foot that maintains the rotational range of motion and the pivot as well. Except they've also included a boot cut for some reason, and I'm not sure why. On a figure like this He-Man, maybe it would have been better to maybe cut out more of this foot and just have this as one piece. Or simply made his shin guard an overlay like they've done on the forearm guard right here. And to maintain the ability to cast the boot and leg in 2 separate colors, all they could really do is create an overlay on this leg piece. Unfortunately, it would increase the complexity, but it would be just an overlay. You'd stick that on and stick the foot on below it to kind of cap it, keep it in place. That would help to hide the cut at the ankle, maintain color separation, and allow the sculpt of the boot to end anywhere along this leg. It would also potentially increase playability because you would just be able to take that overlay off and swap it onto a different figure if you wanted to kit bash something, let's say. But those are 3 cuts that I feel like probably shouldn't exist anymore. Other companies, Hasbro themselves, have used other solutions that don't separate the sculpt, ignoring musculature, that don't decrease articulation in a meaningful way, that doesn't negatively impact the design of the figure and instead might actually contribute to it, and that doesn't decrease playability and might actually bolster it. Do you agree with me? Yes or no? Let me know in the comments. What are some other cuts, some separations in these figures that maybe you don't like, that maybe shouldn't exist? I try to put out videos like this every week, so consider subscribing if you liked this video, and if you did like this video, maybe give me a like. Hype. I've explained it before, but it's a somewhat new feature that allows viewers to directly influence the reach of these types of videos. So it's a feature that I like to use to hype my favorite creators whenever they put out a video. So if you really liked this video, maybe, perhaps you could hype this video. I'm Glenn, and this is Super Articulated. What everyone think about Spider-Man Brand New Day? I thought it was pretty good. I don't know if I would put it in my top 3. I think that would still probably be Spider-Man 1, 2, and Beyond the Spider-Verse. But certainly top 5, right? I guess I gotta watch Thunderbolts now. Fuck.